Hi, welcome to Stories of Art. My name is Karel Heidekoper. Today I'd like to tell you something about Nefertiti, or at least her portrait. She is the most beautiful queen of ancient Egypt. That is not just an opinion, that's more or less her name. Nefertiti means the most beautiful has arrived. And this portrait bust, you can now see in the Neues Museum in Berlin, was found in 1912. And there are lots of questions you could ask about it. First of all, how was it made? There's a limestone center. They made a basic form of limestone, and then they molded on top of that with stucco. So the actual face is made of stucco. That means she's not really sculpted, but molded. There's another question you could ask, and that is, how do we know who she is? There's no name on it. And that's, well, sort of unusual. In many sculptures and portraits of the pharaohs and the queens, you have words written around them in hieroglyphs. And this sort of picture script that they had. And in that you can often see a cartouche. And a cartouche is a sort of an oval shape that signifies that in that oval shape there's a royal name, so of a king, queen, prince. And none of that is on this portrait. So you might wonder, how do we know? Well, that has everything to do with where she was found. As I said, she was found in 1912 in an archaeological site in Egypt called Amarna. And Amarna, that's the modern name of the site. And on that same place there was a city once, ages ago, built by this man called Akhenaten or Akhenaten. You can never really be sure about the way they pronounce all these words. There's no way to ask, so we've sort of made it up. This man, Akhenaten, he started his career when he became pharaoh. His name was Amenhotep IV, but he changed it. He changed it to Akhenaten, or Akhenaten. And there was a good reason for that, for him to do that, because he had changed religions. The Egyptians had this very elaborate set of gods, of hundreds and hundreds of gods, some more important than others, and they lived in a city, the capital of Egypt, where the pharaoh lived, was called Thebes. Today that's called Luxor. It's sort of from north to south, would be in the middle of Egypt. Of course, on the Nile. It's on the eastern side of the Nile, because all the cities they had were always placed on the east of the river. There were small villages on the west, but on the west side of the river there were the tombs, the cities of the dead, and villages of the people who built these tombs, and probably farms. I mean, they were practical enough to use both sides of the river for agriculture. But Thebes was on the eastern side of the river Nile, where today you can find Luxor, and there's a very large temple complex there. Actually, there's several, but the biggest one now is called Karnak, and there was a very powerful priesthood that had a lot of political influence. And when Akhenaten changed his religion, changed his name, and changed his capital, he might have had something in mind of actually changing the politics, trying to get away from these powerful priests. So he moved his capital about, I think, nearly 100 miles north to a new location, and they built this city there. And that city stood for pretty much only one generation as a capital. Probably people lived there for longer, but as a capital it was there for only one generation, because when Akhenaten died, he was succeeded by one of his sons. his eldest, that we know as Tutankhamun. But Akhenaten and Tutankhamun moved back to Thebes. Akhenaten was married. He had several wives, but he was married to Nefertiti. And when they moved to this new city, they started a new religion, but with that also went a new form of art. They have a peculiar style within the Egyptian styles. Most Egyptian art had always been very, very formal. What we know of the Egyptians, that we jokingly say that you can walk like an Egyptian, is what they made for tombs and for temples, and what we know of it is always religious, and probably had very strict rules applied to it. Because we know they could make more lifelike stuff than that. We know that because we have this bust of Nefertiti. And in Amarna, where the new city was, that was actually not called Amarna at the time. It was called Akhenaten. Akhenaten means the horizon of Aten. See, Aten was the new god. Amenhotep started this new religion, called themselves Akhenaten, and Aten is the thing to notice because Aten was his new god. He was the sun disk, and that sun disk was revered more than any other god. That's the idea. We used to think that it was a monotheistic religion, but nowadays I think most Egyptologists agree that it was not monotheistic per se, not just one god, but they had several gods. Just one was much more important than all the others, and that was Aten. Hence the name of the pharaoh, who had Aten in his name, and of course also the city, Akhenaten, which is also Aten. Anyway, he had several wives, but by far his favorite was Nefertiti. And Nefertiti is displayed on quite a few reliefs, and we have some idea of what she looks like. There's this one. This is a famous one where you can see them, the king and the queen, together with their children, with 3 daughters. It's a bit of a puzzle to find all 3 of them. He has one in his arms, kissing her. She has one on her lap, and the third one is harder to find. She's more or less on her shoulder, sort of trying to touch her ear. So a bit difficult to see, but what you can also see on this is these hieroglyphs that are next to them, and you can also see in these hieroglyphs these cartouches. Can you see it sort of in the middle? There's several of them that express the names of the people on it. And of course the sun disk, which is Aten, and it has rays touching everything. These rays actually have little hands on the end, so they really seem to be touching this blessed couple and their family. This is a much more lifelike and much more endearing picture than you ever see with Egyptian art. Usually it's, as I said, formal, and this is a family portrait. They're playing with their kids. What you can also see is the important bit for us is Nefertiti. She's on the right, and she has this crown on her head, and she's the only one we've ever known to have this particular crown on. And this is this sort of strange shape for a crown. It has bands around it, and it has a cobra sitting on the top of it, just over her forehead. Now, if we switch back to Nefertiti, the portrait we were discussing, that has the same crown. And since we know her, only her to wear it, that's why we think it's her. It used to have the cobra. You can see the coils of the cobra on the crown, but the end of it is broken off, so the head of it. Now, I told you they found this in Amarna, in what used to be called Akhenaten, and it was found in a workshop of a sculptor. And that sculptor was called Thutmose, and Thutmose, we know, was the court sculptor to the royal family. But that doesn't answer everything. It would be right in the place where you would expect to find a sculpture like this one. But we don't know why it was made. That's another question we ask when we see something like this. Because it's so much more lifelike than anything else of Egyptian art of any period. We don't know if they made these all the time or that this was a fluke. It could be that they made a very lifelike image of the queen and spread them throughout the country, so made copies of it, spread them throughout the country so you could base your portraits on that, make your official portraits after a likeness. Could be. Then you would have expected we would have found something else like this, even remotely like this, and we haven't. This is completely unique. It could be an attempt to a new form of art. It's by far the most lifelike and most alive sculpture that we know of any Egyptian thing. So maybe they started this road to more lifelike sculpture and then stopped because they thought it wasn't a success, or for any other political or whatever reason. And that's really a question we don't really know how to answer. It also, of the materials that are used, it was limestone core with stucco on top, when usually they would simply sculpt in limestone or any stone. The harder the better often in their case. And they couldn't make anything out of that, so why not do that? So perhaps this is just a trial. There's also this thing that you can see directly when you look her in the face, and that's she's missing one eye. She has one, the right eye, and the left eye is gone. These eyes, the eye that she has is made of a different material. They're made out of stone. It is made out of stone. And it was placed in and stuck in the socket with beeswax, which also means it's pretty easy for it to fall out, because beeswax, it's not the strongest material in the world, of course. So maybe the other eye simply fell out. It could also be that it was never made. They searched for it extensively, but couldn't find it, so they never got around to placing it in. There's even a theory that the eye is missing because she actually didn't have her left eye, but that is most likely nonsense. And now we've seen this portrait from afar, but let me tell you why it's such a beautiful portrait, in my opinion. And that's because it's not idealized. She has this very fine, even face that is convincing as a portrait because of the lines in it. You see, they usually would have would portray people ageless, basically as sort of forever 21. In this case, she isn't. She isn't a woman of some age. She is, what would she be, in her 30s somewhere, because she has lines around her mouth. Her cheeks have fallen in a little bit, and there's a hint of bags under her eyes from being tired. That makes her much more alive than it would be if it were just a pretty face made up as a mannequin doll in a store. That is what is so spectacular about it. They made an actual living likeness of her as she probably looked at that time. And to us, the spectacular thing is that you can actually go to Berlin and find her. You can It's not hard to find in the Neues Museum in Berlin. And you can look this woman in the eye that looks as if she's just about to speak to you. Yet she lived 3,500 years ago on another continent. Now, if you like this video, please hit the subscribe button below. And then you can easily find all my other videos, and if you even hit the little bell next to it, you'll be notified whenever I post a new one. In any case, thank you for listening for now, and maybe see you next time. Bye.